Hey everyone, thanks for joining Learn to Play Games. My name is Lance, and in today's video I'm going to teach you how to play Horizon Zero Dawn, the board game. This is a game by Steamforged Games. It is a 1 to 4 player game that takes roughly 90 to 180 minutes to play, and is either a competitive or cooperative game depending upon the mode you've chosen to play. So in this video I'm going to teach you how to play the competitive mode, starting with components, setup, phases of the game, and end-game scoring and conditions. As always, if you find these videos helpful, if you like what I do, please consider hitting that like button, subscribing to my channel. It's one of the easiest ways you can support channels like mine so we can continue to grow and be able to produce this content. Also, let me know in the comments down below if there's other videos you want to see around this, whether it's a playthrough video. I am also looking at covering some of the expansions, so let me know if there's ones that you would like me to cover specifically or earlier rather than later. Also, let me know in the comments down below if there's anything you see around this video or if you have any questions about it. I know there's a ton of rules with this one, and there's been a lot of discussion on Board Game Geek about how certain things work. So let me know in the comments down below if you notice anything that I've gotten wrong, or if there's questions specifically that you'd like answered. I can do my best to try to cover those as well. So let's go ahead and head to the table, and I'll teach you how to play. There are 3 different colored dice included in the game. The first is a black die that'll have 3 sides with a critical symbol on it and 3 sides with a blank. Next, you're going to have 3 blue dice. Each die is going to have 2 sides with a single arrow, 3 sides with a double arrow, and 1 side with a triple arrow. Finally, there will be 4 orange dice. These are going to have 1 side with a blank, 3 sides with a single, 1 side with a double, and 1 side with a critical. At the beginning of the game, each player is going to select a hunter they want to play as and gain all of the cards for that hunter. This is going to include the hunter's profile card, which will list the name of that hunter on the top, along with its icon on the side, which you'll find on all of its cards in its deck, its starting resources, and then each hunter is also going to have a trait that will be active throughout the game that will grant them some sort of ability. Each hunter is also going to have some starting equipment, which will include weapons and armor. These pieces of equipment all will have a name at the top, along with their icon, the number of modifications that can be added to them, and their starting level, which each hunter will always start with level 0 cards. And each one of these is also going to have a gray semicircle in it that will create a full circle around the hunter so you know you're placing the cards in the right slots. On the bottom of each of these cards is also going to list some stats. For weapons, it's going to list the range of that weapon, and then any bonuses or additions that you're going to add to that weapon's attack, along with any critical results for that weapon you can spend. For example, on the side here, we have the hammer that this hunter is going to be using. Has a range of 0. It's going to add 2 orange dice to an attack, and will also, if you spend a critical result, will grant you a fire effect on that. Finally, with the armor, they work exactly the same way, with again listing the modifications and any bonuses that you will receive when making a dodge or evade roll. And then some of these will also grant an ability on the bottom. Each hunter is also going to start the game with their own custom action deck. This deck is going to contain a number of different cards that the player will be able to use throughout the game to carry out different actions. This deck is also going to double as that hunter's health. From here, let's look at a breakdown of the cards. So each card is going to list the name of that card at the top, along with the type of card it is. And there are potentially 3 different types of cards you'll find in your action deck. You'll have ability cards, ammo cards, and interrupt cards that'll have the exclamation point on the top. Each of these cards is also going to have an icon of the hunter that it's part of, and he'll have a level. The hunter will always start the game with only their level 0 cards. Then, with the ability cards, you're going to have the ability that's listed. And some of these abilities will have requirements that must be met in order to use them. For example, with this one, this ability can only be used when performing a melee attack. So I can only use it when I'm doing that, and then I'll carry out the ability itself. Next, we'll have ammo cards, and these are going to have a particular weapon that they're attached to. You'll only be able to use an ammo card if you have that weapon equipped to use this particular ammo. Then you'll have the conditions of that ammo, what kind of effects it has. For this trap ammo, this is going to provide a fire condition to the enemy and will also allow you to roll a blue die. Some cards are also going to have an ability on the bottom that can be triggered by resolving any effects on them. For this one, we can discard a Blaze Salvage card to add a AoE fire to this area as well. With this ammo, this is going to be used with a melee weapon, and this one is going to add an additional 2 orange die to the attack. This is also going to provide a condition for any critical that's rolled, so you can choose to assign a critical to this to do an additional damage. And again, this particular ammo has a condition that is going to be triggered if it does any damage. Going back to the last type of card you're going to find, the interrupts. These are going to tell you when you can use them at particular times. For example, with this one, while this hunter has 6 or less cards in their action deck, you can choose to scrap this card when they are attacked to ignore all damage and effects of the attack. Throughout the game, each hunter is also going to be able to level up. Each hunter is going to have their own special skill tree that they're going to follow for this process, and at the beginning of the game, they're going to place their token on the start location. Once they level up, they're going to choose one of the areas to move this token into and gain the benefits of that. These could include new traits, new action cards, or even new weapons for that hunter. For example, when we look at level 1 for our hunter, we can choose to either become fire forged or we can have the ablative armor. Either way we choose, we're going to move our token in there and then gain that card. For trait cards, you're going to place that underneath your profile, and this is going to add an additional trait that you'll be able to use throughout the rest of the game. With the action cards, you're going to add them to your action deck, or weapon cards will replace the current weapon that you have equipped if you choose to. This skill tree is also going to provide you with the maximum number of cards you can have in your action deck. To start the game, you'll have a limit, and then each time you level up, that limit is going to be increased, increasing your health and the number of cards you can have in your deck. The Salvage deck is going to contain resource cards and fate cards that players will be able to use throughout the game to activate abilities on some of their action cards, as well as buying new action cards from the market. You will find a number of different resources included in this deck, including Sparkers, Blaze, Chillwater, and Metal Shards, as well as fate cards that when you draw it, you'll have to resolve the effects of that card. Some will be good and some will be bad. And I'll cover more of this during that step. Moving over to the enemies, there are 2 different types of cards you're going to be encountering with them. The first are the enemy's data cards, and this is going to list the name of the enemy along with its icon on the side. And then on the other side, you're going to have the different stats for that enemy, which includes its hit points, its defensive value, its salvage value. When defeating it, you'll draw a number of salvage cards, the glory it's worth, and its encounter value. Some enemies are also going to have components, which will list their letters underneath or by the side of each component, which will correspond to the different locations on that enemy. Components are also going to have a tear value, which is the amount of damage you must do to destroy that particular component. Now, if you can do half of that value or more, then you also will damage it instead. So you'll place the blue side of that next to it. At that point, that component is going to have its hit points halved, so then you'd only have to do 2 damage to this power cell to destroy it. When you destroy a component, you'll flip this over to its red side, and its effects will immediately come into play. So this is going to disable A attacks, and it's also going to deal that number of damage to the enemy. Once a component is destroyed, you cannot attack it again. And some enemies will also have an ability that is going to be listed on the side of their card that you'll always have an effect or will take place under certain conditions. Along with the enemy's data card, each enemy is going to have a behavior card or a deck of behavior cards depending upon the enemy type. Each one of these cards is going to again list the name of the enemy along with their icon and will pose a question that the player must answer. For example, with this one, another enemy within 2 squares. If the answer is yes, you'll resolve this column. If the answer is no, you're going to resolve this column. From there, once you've selected the column in which you wish or you're going to need to resolve, then you're going to have 2 different sections. There's going to be mandatory sections, which will be separated by the gray lines and will not have a color in it. Or you'll have the conditional sections, which will have this blue haze over it, as you can see here as well. With the conditional ones, you're only going to resolve one of those during the turn, and I'll go over this more in detail during the enemy step. But for example, let's go ahead and say that we answer this question and it's no, then we're going to resolve this column here. The first square on there says that we're going to move 1 towards the closest enemy. Well, if there are no enemies on the board, then we cannot resolve this, and we'd move on to the next one if we can resolve that. If, for example, we resolve this, let's say that we do carry this out, then the next one is not going to be resolved, as we're only going to resolve 1 conditional step. Once we've resolved either one of these, then we will have to resolve this if we're able to meet it. So if there is a hunter in our enemy's space, then he was going to resolve an attack action. Likewise, on this side, this is going to have us move 2 spaces towards the closest hunter, and then follow that up with an attack if we're in the space with the hunter. And again, I'll go over this more during the enemy attack step. The last thing I want to go over before moving into setup are the tiles themselves. So each tile is going to be broken down into 9 squares and is going to have a number of features on it. Each tile will be numbered and is going to be double-sided, with one side having the side for 1 to 2 players and the other side having it for 3 to 4, as you can see in this image here. Then the tiles are also going to have other features. Tall grass is always going to be printed right on the tile and will be signified by that symbol there. And you'll also have other features that will be added, such as these spaces here will correspond to whichever card and counter card you've played and will tell you what to place. So with this one, we would place a ruin token on there. Then you also have spawn points, and these are going to again tell you what type of creatures to place on there. So for example, with spawn point A, we're going to place a watcher on that point. This is also going to show you the path of which enemies are going to take when they are unaware of the playing characters. All right, so let's go ahead and move into setup now. So the first thing you're going to do is place out all of your different decks of cards. So you'll place out your 3 merchant level decks, level 1, 2, and 3, and you don't need to shuffle these, as well as the stamina deck. Finally, you'll place out your salvage deck and your event deck, and both of those can be shuffled up at this point. To set up the tracking deck, you're first going to choose your quest. Now in the core game, you only have one quest, which is to go after the Sawtooth, but as you buy expansions, you'll have other choices of enemies you wish to go after. For this one, we're going to be using the Sawtooth, and each one of his cards and all of the tracking cards will have his symbol on it, so that way you know you're using the right deck. From there, then the Hunter's Call card can be placed off to the side, as we'll have that later in the next step of setup. Then you'll grab the level 3 cards, shuffle up that deck individually, and place that face down. Next, you'll do the same thing with level 2, and place those on top of that deck, and the same with level 1 cards. Now that you've created your tracking deck, go ahead and place the Hunter's Call card at the end of that track and leave 4 spaces open before it, and then go ahead and place your tracking deck out on that space. For player setup, each player is going to choose a hunter that they'd like to play as, and they will gain their hunter's profile card that they'll place in their area, along with their starting weapons and armor, which they're going to place so that it creates a gray circle around their profile card. Each hunter is also going to have an upgrade card that you can place their token on the starting position. It's also going to list the number of cards in your action deck, so go ahead and count those up, make sure you have the right number, and then you can shuffle that deck up and draw 5 cards from it. Finally, you're also going to place out any of the additional upgrade cards that are going to be listed on here. You can place those underneath that or somewhere else in your starting area. And each hunter's profile card is also going to list any salvage that hunter starts with. So our hunter here is going to start with Blaze, and you'll also grab your hunter's miniature. Once you have the character set up, then you're going to choose one character to be the leader. This can be the character with the most experience or the oldest character. So I'm going to go ahead and have my character over here be the leader. And then the other, one of the other characters is going to be the fledgling. That character can be the youngest character playing, or however else you want to determine that, and then go ahead and give that character the fledgling token. Next, you can place out all the cards you're going to be using for this game for the different creatures or enemies and enemy types. For the Sawtooth and the Shell Walker, you're going to shuffle up their decks of cards, as each one of them has their own little deck, and place those off to the side that you'll use at a later point. The other cards you can just place somewhere that you can grab from when you need them to place them out, as not every encounter will use all enemy types. You can also place out any tokens you're going to be using for this game, so I'm going to go ahead and place those out. From here, you're ready to move into the game. Each game of Horizon Zero Dawn is played over 5 encounters, and each encounter is broken down into 3 phases: the tracking phase, encounter phase, and campfire phase. I'm going to take you through each one of these in more detail to show you how each one of them works. So we're going to go ahead and start with the tracking phase. There are 2 different decks of cards you're going to use in the tracking phase. The first one is the tracking deck, and this is going to be used by the player that has the leader token. That player will choose which card that they want to use to encounter. And let's go ahead and look at a breakdown of these cards. So each of the cards is going to have an icon in the top corner of the overall enemy you're trying to hunt for this particular game that you're playing. Next, you're going to have the encounter or tracking cards level, and there's going to be 3 levels that are included: level 1, 2, and 3. And these are also color coordinated, so yellow cards are going to be level 1, orange cards will be level 2, and red cards will be level 3. From there, it's also going to list your encounter points you need based on the number of players. And you'll see there's 2 different categories in here, one for 1 and 2 players, and one for 3 and 4. And this is the minimum number of encounter points you're going to need to collect in order to successfully complete this encounter. From there, it's going to show you the layout of the tiles, and then it's also going to list the enemies and where they're going to spawn underneath there, as well as any additional tokens you're going to need to put out and which spaces to put those out in. And finally, if you're able to clear all the enemies from the tiles, then you're also going to get a bonus number of salvage cards that you're going to get to draw at the end of the encounter. And this will be for each hunter participating. The other deck of cards you'll be using in the tracking phase is going to be the event deck, and this is going to be used after the very first tracking phase. This will be used by the player that has the fledgling token and represents that player getting a little bit of a boost to help them since they're in last place. Now that player is the only player that is going to be able to take advantage of this card no matter what the effects on the card are. Each one of these cards will list the name of the card and will provide the effect or a effect that is either going to have a lasting effect for that entire encounter, a single use effect, or one that will be resolved before the encounter starts. The tracking phase is going to have you setting up the encounter that you're going to select during this phase. So to start this phase, you're going to have the player with the leader token draw the top 3 cards of the tracking deck and secretly choose one of them that he wants to have the party go on. Simultaneously, the player that has the fledgling token is going to do the same thing by drawing the top 3 cards of the event deck and selecting one of those secretly. This is going to happen in each tracking phase except for the very first one. During the very first tracking phase, the fledgling player will not get to draw an event card. So let's go ahead and move into it. So our leader player is going to draw the top 3 cards of the event or the tracking deck and choose one of those cards that he would like the party to go on. So with this one, I'm going to make it nice and easy. I'm going to select this card here. The other 2 cards can be returned to the boxes. You won't be using them for this game. So I'll just go ahead and place those off to the side. And then again, like I said, the other player, except for the very first tracking phase, is going to select an encounter card or an event card. At that point, once both players have made their selection, both players will reveal those cards simultaneously. And then you're going to move into the setup part of this, where you're going to follow the diagram and set up everything you need for this encounter. So for this one, I'm going to need tiles 2A and 5A. So I'm going to go ahead and grab those real quick. The other tiles can be placed off to the side, as you won't need them for this particular encounter at this point. Then you're going to set up the tiles based on the diagram. So 2A is going to be rotated so that this side is down, and you're also going to want to make sure you have the side of the tile based on the number of players. So I have a 2-player game, so I'm using the side that has the 1 to 2 player on it. So this will go up here, and then the 5 is also going to be rotated so that this one is down in the corner, and then these will be placed together. Next, we're going to follow the bottom of the card for the rest of the setup. So first off, I'm going to go ahead and spawn my enemies in this one. So I'm going to have a watcher in A, and I only have 1 A among these spaces. And I'm also going to have a scrapper in B, and there's only 1 B as well. Next, I'm going to have ruins placed in the square locations. So I have 2 of those, so 1 will go there and 1 will go there. And that is everything for setup. So at this point, then this will be placed in the encounter track. And if there was a event picked, you're going to place that event underneath that card. And again, any event that's selected is only going to be applied to the fledgling player if there's any benefits to it, or if it affects the group, everybody will be affected except for that player. So for example, let's go ahead and look at a couple examples of this. I'm going to draw the top 3 cards and kind of go over them real quick. So with this one, erratic behavior, discard this card to change the target of an enemy's attack to another hunter of your choice. The chosen hunter must be in range of the attack. So with this one, during the encounter, this fledgling player can choose to activate this card at any time, and this will allow him to change the enemy's target. The next one is sabotage. Each other hunter must scrap the top 3 cards from their action deck at the start of this encounter. So this one would affect every player, every hunter, except for the player that has the fledgling token. And likewise with the rest of them. Again, this would be simply slid underneath the encounter or the tracking card, such as that. All right. From here, then, the last step is for the hunting player or the hunters to be placed out. They're going to be placed out on the tile that has the white circle on it, so this 2A tile, in any outer space that does not contain an enemy. So I can place them in any one of these spaces, but not this space, as there's an enemy there, and it's also connected to another tile. So my leader will go first, and I'm going to place him here. The next player will go, and you can have multiple hunters in the same space, so I'm going to go ahead and go in that space as well. From here, we're ready to move on to the next phase, the encounter phase. Now, during the encounter phase, each player is going to get to take a turn, starting with the player that has a leader token. During each player's turn, they're going to have a hunter turn, which is going to consist of 3 steps: the hunter activation step, the enemy activation step, and the maintenance step. Once the player has completed their 3 steps, then we'll move to the next player in clockwise order to take their hunter turn. And this is going to continue until all players have had a turn. So let's go ahead and move into this with the player that has the leader token. That is going to be the starting player and will take his turn. So at the start of his turn, that player can look or go through the cards that he has in his hand and discard any of those cards to the discard pile. So let's go ahead and say that I have 3 backswing cards. I'm going to go ahead and discard 2 of these in hopes to get some better cards. Now keep in mind that this is part of your life as well. So as you discard these cards, you are depleting your life, and so you want to be careful on how much you discard. From there, you're going to draw back up to your starting hand size of 5 cards, unless some other ability or item allows you to draw more. Now, if you start this phase with more than 5 cards in your hand, you do not have to discard down to 5 cards. From there, then, your player is going to start their hunter turn with the hunter activation step. During this step, the player is going to get to perform 2 actions from a selection of different actions, and they can only perform each action 1 time during their turn. So each one of the actions can only be performed once, such as a melee action or a ranged action or a trap action. And I'm going to go through each one of these in more detail so you know how each one of these actions works. The first action I'm looking at is a sprint action, and this action is going to allow your hunter to move up to 2 adjacent spaces, and you can even change directions during this sprint action. Now, sprint actions are very noisy actions and will alert to any enemies that are adjacent to your hunter on the space that you start that sprint action, any space you move through or into it during that action. So, for example, with my hunter here, if I choose to do that sprint action, first he would alert any enemies that are in any adjacent spaces to him, which there currently aren't any. Then let's go ahead and say he moves into this space here as his first space that he moves. Then any enemies adjacent to that space are going to be alerted. So at this point, then the watcher would be alerted, and I would place an alert token next to him. From there, then again, I can do my final move part of this. So let's go ahead and say I move into this space here. Then any enemies in any of these spaces would be alerted as well. So the scrapper would also be alerted. So this would be a very poor move on my hunter's part. And then that is the completion of that action. The sneak action is going to allow your hunter to move 1 space in any direction, including diagonally. Now, this action will not alert enemies to your presence. So, for example, with my hunter, I could choose to move into any one of these 5 spaces that are adjacent to that space. So let's go ahead and say, for example, with this one, I move there. The craft action is going to allow you to take the bottom 3 cards from your action discard pile and shuffle them back into your action deck. This action is also the exception to the rule where you can choose to spend 1 or both of your actions to do this. If you spend both, then you will return the bottom 6 cards to your action deck and then shuffle that deck up. The distract action is going to allow you to distract an enemy. The player is going to choose a target square and a non-alert enemy within 2 squares of their hunter. Then the enemy is going to immediately move 1 square towards them. So for example, with my hunter here, I can choose to distract this watcher if I wanted to, or the scrapper as they're both 2 squares away from me. So in order to do that, let's go ahead and target the watcher as he is a non-alert enemy, and I'm going to go ahead and choose this square up here. So then the watcher is going to move 1 square towards that square by the shortest path. The next action I'll look at is a ranged attack, and for this example I'm going to go ahead and use my hunter over here as she has a hunter bow, and it'll work out really well for this example. So from there then, whenever you're performing a ranged attack, you're going to do this in a number of steps that are done in order. The first is that you're going to choose an enemy that is within range of your weapon and that you have line of sight to. With the hunter bow, I have a range of 2 spaces, so I can target either one of these enemies. From there, then I have to determine line of sight, and in Horizon Zero Dawn, line of sight is very simple. You simply draw a straight line from your space to the center of your target space, and as long as that line does not go outside of the play area, then you have line of sight to your target. So I'm going to go ahead and target this watcher over here. From there, then the second step is going to be whether or not I want to target a component. With the watchers, they do not have any components, so I don't have to worry about that. I'll simply be targeting the watcher itself. Next, I'm going to go ahead and play any cards that I want to. With a ranged attack, you must play an ammo card that matches your weapon. So with the bow, I have to play some arrows. So I have a couple of choices here. I can do the hunter arrow, or I can do the hardpoint arrow. I think I'm going to go with just playing the hunter arrow. And then I can also play an ability card if I want to. And I think I'm going to hold off on that at this point. So from there, then I'm going to gather up all the dice that I need. My hunter bow grants me 2 orange dice, and the arrows grant me another one. So I'm going to be rolling 3 oranges. And then from there, if I have any rerolls, then I can do that at this point. You're only allowed to reroll the dice one time, so if I choose to reroll, I must choose all of the dice that I wish to reroll in this action. I cannot choose to reroll one die, and then after I resolve that, I can reroll another one. You have to resolve all of them at once if you wish to reroll any of them. After you resolve that, then the next step is determining criticals. So I did happen to roll 2 criticals in this one, so I have to apply those to either the ammo or weapon. Each critical can be applied to different things or the same thing. So with the hunter bow, it grants me 2 damage, so I can apply that with both of these criticals for a total of 4 damage. Once I've designated what I'm going to do, then I'm going to move on to the next step, which is applying that damage. First off, I have to apply critical damage, as that is going to bypass an enemy's armor. Now, with an unalert enemy, such as this one that we're targeting, that is going to be the case either way. An enemy has to be alert when you target them for their armor to apply. But either way, with that, I'm going to apply this damage first from the criticals. So I have a total of 4 damage that'll get through first, and the enemy only has 4 hit points. But let's go ahead and say that it had a little bit more. Once I've applied any critical effects, both from damage and any status effects such as fire or shock or anything, then I will move on to applying regular damage, where I'm going to total up all the number of pips that I've rolled or arrows that I've rolled, and then I will apply those to the enemy as well. If the enemy is aware or alert, then I will subtract any armor from that value. So with the Watcher, it has 1 armor, so if it was alert, in this situation, this 1 damage would have been soaked up by its armor. If I would have rolled 2, then one of them would have been taken by the armor, and the other one would have gone through to the Watcher to be applied. Once I've resolved all the damage and determined whether or not my target is eliminated, if it is, it's simply removed from the board. And if any other effects are triggered from that, for example, with that enemy, I have an enemy that's next to it, so it is going to become alert as that enemy was destroyed that was adjacent to it. Then the enemy is going to grant me 1 salvage card, so I'll get to draw 1 salvage card from the deck and collect that. And normally you can keep these hidden as well. I also will gain 1 glory for defeating that enemy, and it's going to be worth 1 encounter point. Each encounter is going to dictate how many encounter points you need to have to be successful in that encounter. Any cards you used for that are going to be discarded to your discard pile. You can return the dice, and from there, then that is going to be the end of that action. Now, if, for example, we had not done enough damage to that enemy, for example, let's say that I only ended up doing a couple points of damage, you would simply place that damage out next to that enemy, and you would continue on with your turn. Now that I've covered a ranged attack, let's take a look at a melee attack, as this works pretty much the same way with a couple of exceptions. So first off, with this one, I'm going to go back to my hunter over here to make this attack. For a melee attack, I must target an enemy that's in my space or in an adjacent space to my space. If the enemy is in an adjacent space, then I will get a free move action to move into that space with the enemy before resolving that melee attack. From there, then you're going to follow these same steps. First off, with my weapon, I am in range now. From there, then I can choose to play a card. Now, that is the other exception with this. With a melee attack, you can choose to play an ammo card if you want to, but you do not have to. So, for example, I have Cleave, and I also have Backswing. So I can choose if I want to play any of those. I don't have to, I can simply use the weapon itself. I'm going to go ahead and play Backswing for this one, and I'm also going to play Prime the Area. As this one has an ability, it says that I can only be used when performing a melee attack. Before making this attack, the hunter may perform a free ranged attack. This ranged attack must be to place a trap. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. My trap has a range of 1, so I can place it in any one of these spaces. So I'm going to go ahead and use the Firewire. So in order to do this, I'm going to place 1 trap token on there that has a number, and the same number I'm going to place in the space I wish to place. So I'm going to go ahead and place it here just in case I don't defeat him. My backswing lets me push, so that could potentially finish him off. From there, then I'm going to go ahead and resolve the rest of the attack. So at this point, then I'm going to go ahead and gather up my dice. So I'm going to get 4 orange dice for this attack. I'll go ahead and roll these. And I did very well. I did not roll any criticals, and I don't have any way of re-rolling any of those dice. So then I'm going to apply the rest of the effects. So then I would total up all of this damage. Again, if the enemy was alert before this attack, then I would subtract armor, so I would remove 1. If the enemy is not, in this situation he was not, all of this will go through and I will defeat that enemy. I would also be able to apply any other effects, such as with my backswing, if this attack damages the target, you may push that target. It did damage him, unfortunately, or fortunately, he was defeated in this process, but if he wasn't, then I could have chosen to push him, and I can push him in any one of the spaces I wanted to that's adjacent to me. From there, then I would go ahead and gather up all the stuff again. The enemy would be removed. I would gain 1 salvage card, 1 glory point, and I would have 1 encounter point for that. From there, the last type of attack action I want to talk about is a trap action. Now, you already saw me place a trap, but let's go ahead and say instead that trap was placed here. And at this point, then, let's say I did a distract action to move this enemy in here. Now, if an enemy is in a space that has a trap, it is not going to trigger it. Or if I chose to place this trap in this space with this enemy, it would also not trigger it. An enemy must move into a space that contains a trap in order for it to trigger that trap. So let's go ahead and say that this enemy was moved into that space, and the trap is going to be triggered now. Then I will resolve the effects of the trap. So first off, the trap would catch that enemy on fire, and with my forge ability, or the tempered by flame, I will gain a glory point anytime I have an enemy that takes the fire condition. Then I'm also going to roll a blue die and resolve the damage on that. So I do 2 damage to that enemy, and I'll place 2 tokens on there. Now, an important thing with the traps, they are not allowed to target components. You must go against the enemy specifically. So I cannot choose to target a component with that. From there, then, that is the end of that trap. This will be removed and discarded back to your token pile, and this can be discarded to your area as well. Now, some traps also have an ability, so I could choose to discard Blaze to cause an AoE fire. Now, there wasn't any enemies around there, and I must do that before resolving the trap. But I didn't need to do that as there's no other enemies, so that is the end of that. The last thing I want to talk about with attack actions is components themselves. So as you already saw with the other attack actions, there's a step within the attack where you can choose to target a component. So let's look at a quick example of that. So let's go ahead and say our hunter is in this space with the enemy scrapper. He's going to target that enemy, and he's going to choose one of these components to target. Now he has 2 different choices. The radar is really light and only 2 damage to destroy and 1 damage to damage. Or he can go with that power cell, which is 4 damage. So it's a little bit tougher to destroy, but it's going to have a better effect. So let's go ahead and say that he goes after the power cell. So I'm going to go ahead and use the cleave to get an extra die. And I'll get 2 orange dice. And then I'll go ahead and roll. And I did very well with that roll. So first off, I'm going to apply the critical. So I could choose to either have the fire go off, or I can do 4 damage to that. So I'm going to go ahead and do the fire with this one to catch my enemy on fire. And then after that, then I'm going to resolve the regular damage. So I'm going to count up the number of arrows. I got 4. And my enemy's armor is 1, but it is not aware of me, so it will not apply that armor. So then these 4 damage are going to go against the tear value. If I get equal to that or greater, then I have destroyed that component. If I get at least half of that, I've damaged that component. So I've definitely got enough to destroy it. So I'm going to place the A on my enemy to signify that it's been destroyed. And I'm also going to receive a glory point for destroying that component. I'll also receive 1 glory point for catching my opponent on fire due to my tempered in by fire ability. Then that enemy is going to take 2 damage for that value. Now there's a couple important things to point out with this. Once a component is destroyed, you can never target that component again. And even if I did more damage, let's go ahead and say that I ended up doing 5 points of damage, that would not transfer over to the enemy. No matter how much damage I do, when a component is destroyed, all that it's going to do to the enemy is the value that's listed on the card. I can never do extra damage to the enemy beyond what the damage listed on the component is. From there, then I would be able to continue on with my turn. And the final type of action I want to cover is a free action. Now, free actions still have to follow the guidelines that are already established, so you can only do each action 1 time during your turn, even a free action. So for example, in the previous example where we were doing combat and my hunter over here had played Prime the Area, which allowed him to play a trap as a free action. At this point, once he had played that, then he cannot choose to perform that trap action again during his turn, even as another action. So if he would have done his his melee attack first, then he had an action after that. He cannot choose to do that trap action again, as he's already used it, even though it was a free action. And this applies to all of the actions. So if you do a stealth action where you get to move one space, you do not get to do another one as a separate action. Now, once a player has completed their actions or chooses not to perform any additional actions, they're ready to move into the second phase of their turn, which is the enemy activation phase. During this phase, the players are going to have two steps that they're going to follow. First off, you're going to activate all of the alert enemies, and then after that, then you'll activate all the non-alert enemies. I'm going to take you through each one of these. First off, let's start by talking about how the enemies become alert. When an enemy becomes alert, you're going to place an alert token next to that enemy. And once an enemy is alert, there is no way for that enemy to return to non-alert status. There are 7 different ways that an enemy can become alert, and I'm going to go through each one of these. First, if a hunter attacks an enemy, even if there is no damage done or conditions applied to the enemy will be alert, or if an enemy takes damage for any reason from any other effect, they will also become alert. If another alert enemy is in the same square as a non-alert enemy, for example, if the Watcher moves in here, then the Scrapper will become alert. If another enemy is attacked in the same or adjacent square, so if this hunter attacked the Watcher, he would become alert, but the Scrapper would also become alert because the Watcher was attacked in an adjacent square to the Scrapper. At the beginning of the enemy turn, if a hunter is in the same square as an enemy that is not alert, they will alert that enemy, or if a hunter is in an adjacent square to an enemy that is not alert, they will become alert unless that hunter is in tall grass. And with the Scrapper, it has a special ability, the radar sweep, that ignores tall grass. So even in that situation, the Scrapper would still become alert. The final way is if a hunter sprints and enemies are in adjacent squares, or if the hunter sprints into a square with an enemy. Now that I've covered the different ways that enemies can become alert, the next step is to go over what happens when alert enemies activate. So for this example, I'm going to say that both the Watcher and the Scrapper are alert. From there, you're going to activate all alert enemies on all of the boards, starting with the enemy that is closest to the active hunter. And if there is a tie, then you're going to activate those enemies in the order that the active hunter chooses, as this might have some strategy or be advantageous to the active hunter, as you're going to see in this example. So from there, then you're going to start with the enemy that is closest to the active hunter, which is the Watcher, and you're going to reference their behavior card. Or if it's one of the other enemies that has a behavior deck, you're going to reveal the top card of that deck and resolve it. Each one of these cards will have a question that you're going to answer with a yes or a no, and then resolve all of the effects of that column. Again, as we covered before, there are going to be 2 different types of effects. You'll have mandatory effects, which will be gray, and conditional effects, which will have the blue highlight behind them. And with those, you're only going to resolve one, as you're going to see with the Scrapper. So from there, with the Watcher, if there are there any non-alert enemies within 2 squares? Right now, there are no non-alert enemies in 2 squares, so we'll resolve this column here. We're going to move one towards the closest hunter, which the closest hunter is the active hunter. Again, if there's a tie with that, you're always going to move towards the active hunter unless it says otherwise. Next, now that we've resolved that, then we'll resolve the next one, which is a melee attack. This has a range of 0, and with melee attacks, the enemies will not move. So if the enemy was in here and it had a range 0 melee attack, it would not move into the hunter's space. It would stay in this space. And if there was a hunter in here, it would attack that hunter instead. From there, enemies do not roll dice. They're going to do a straight number of damage. So the melee attack does 4 damage to that hunter. And with that, the hunter has an opportunity to make an evade roll. So with our hunter, as you can see here on his armor card, he's going to roll a blue die and subtract that number of hits. So we rolled a 2, so we're going to stop 2 points of damage from going through. Now, any damage that is not blocked, you will have to discard cards from your hands or your action deck for those, and you can choose between the 2. So for example, with my hunter, I could choose to take 2 cards from my hand and discard them into my discard pile, or I could take 1 from my hand and take the top card of my action deck and discard it. So I'm going to go ahead and take the top 2, or these 2 cards from my action hand and discard those. From there, then I also have to do a dodge roll, which makes me, or forces me to move into one of the adjacent spaces of my choice. Now, with some of the hunters, for example, with my hunter, I have the choice. I do not have to make a dodge roll after making the evade roll. But in this situation, I do want to, as the next enemy, I know what he's going to do already. So I'm going to go ahead and move my hunter back one space as the part of that action. From there, then that enemy had activated, and then we move on to the next enemy that is closest to the active hunter. In this situation, it's going to be the scrapper, and so with that one again, we're going to reference its behavior card. The hunter is within 1 square. This is not true as there is no hunter that is within 1 square, so we're going to go down the no column. This column has 2 conditional effects, and we only can resolve 1 conditional effect, or the first one that is going to be true. With this one, it is going to make a ranged attack at range 2 that is going to do 6 damage, and it's going to target the closest hunter. If there is a tie, so for example, if both of our hunters were in that space there, then it would target the active hunter if there's a tie like that. If there is not, with our active hunter being way up here and out of range of that attack, he's going to target the closest hunter. And if there are no hunters within that space, then he would not resolve that attack at all. So in that situation, that our hunter over here would have to resolve that. And then our scrapper's turn would be over, as that is the first conditional action that he can take that he was able to carry out. Now, for example, if our hunters were not in those spaces, so let's go ahead and say they were up here, then you would move to the next one, which is to move 2 squares, or move 2 towards the closest hunter. In that situation, then it would move 2 towards the active hunter and not another hunter, unless that hunter was closer. Once you've completed activating all of the alert enemies, the next step is for you to activate all non-alert enemies. For this example, I'm going to go ahead and say that both of our enemies are not alert. And so from there, then you're going to activate each one of them, starting with the one that is closest to the active hunter. And with each one of them, they are going to follow their patrol route that they are currently on, following the arrows on that route, moving 1 space along that path. So for example, our watcher, he's going to move here, and then our scrapper will move down here. Now, if one of these enemies happens to start on a space that is not on a patrol route, then they are going to try to move back onto that patrol route by the shortest distance furthest along on that patrol route. So with our watcher here, he would move onto this square as it is the furthest square on that patrol route's path. The other important thing is if an enemy is on the ends of a patrol route, so for example, if our watcher was up here and they activate, then they are going to be able to leave the board. In that situation, they have escaped, and you will lose that opportunity to gain those encounter points, which might also end this particular encounter in a failure. So you're going to have to be careful about letting enemies escape. Once you've completed activating all of the non-alert enemies, this phase has come to an end and you're ready to move on to the maintenance phase. A couple of important things I want to cover before moving on to the next step. First is fainting. So if a player cannot discard a number of cards equal to the damage sustained by their hunter, or the hunter's action deck runs out and they cannot draw any cards at the start of their turn, then the hunter is going to faint. A hunter that faints is placed on its side. So let's go ahead and say that my hunter here had fainted. So we're going to place him on his side. Now at this point, that hunter will not be targeted for any of the enemy activations or anything like that. He is ignored for all those different effects. If it is taken place during his hunter step, he is simply going to skip on to the enemy step immediately and not be able to resolve any other effects. A hunter that has fainted is also going to lose any glory points that they currently have, and they will also skip all 3 steps during their next activation. From that point on, then the hunter is going to be turned back up. They'll shuffle their action cards back into their action deck, and they'll get to start their next turn as normal. So you'll have to skip a full, complete turn before getting to take another turn. The one other thing I want to go over is conditions, and there are 3 different conditions in the game that hunters might suffer from, which are fire, freeze, and shock. Now, one important thing to point out is if a hunter is immune to a condition, then they can never suffer the effects of that condition. And each hunter can only have one of each of the types of conditions on them at any time. So if a hunter is already suffering from a condition and they receive another token, they will not get that token. So for this example, I'm going to go through all 3, but again, like I said, with this hunter, he is actually immune to fire, so he could never suffer the effects of fire. But let's go ahead and cover this anyways. So with a hunter that has a fire token, at the end of their activation, they're going to suffer 1 damage, discarding a card from their hand or action deck, and then they will remove that token. Next, we have the freeze condition. With this one, when a hunter has a freeze token and they must make an evade roll, they will discard any critical successes on that evade roll. and then at the end of their activation, they'll discard this token. The final token is the shock token. With the shock token, that is going to stop a hunter from playing any interrupt cards during their turn. And then at the end of their turn, they're going to go ahead and discard this token as normal. The third and final step in a player's turn is the maintenance step. During this step, there's a number of different checks you're going to do. First off, you're going to total up the number of times that each player has fainted and add them together. If that total is equal to or greater than the number of players playing, then the encounter has failed and the players will progress onto the campfire phase. If not, then the next step is to total up the number of encounter points you've collected, and you're going to get these points by eliminating enemies. Each enemy is going to get you a certain number of points. As a group, you're going to total up those points, and if they are equal to or greater than the number of encounter points you need based on the tracking card, as you can see here, then you can choose as a group. If the majority of you agree, you can choose to end the encounter. If not, then you'll progress to the next player's turn in clockwise order. Now, the other thing is, if you don't have enough encounter points yet, and one or more enemies have fled from the encounter, then you have to total up the number of enemies that are left if there's enough encounter points even to complete the encounter. If there are not, then the players have lost this encounter, and again, we'll move on to the campfire phase. Otherwise, then the players can continue on playing the encounter. Now, if at any point during the encounter you have eliminated all the enemies, the encounter is going to end as well, and you'll also get a bonus salvage card based on the tracking card. So if all the enemies are eliminated and none of the enemies have escaped, you're going to get a bonus amount. So that's an important thing to kind of work towards as a group as well. Not letting those enemies escape is going to be key, as you're going to get encounter points for them, as well as other perks and benefits, such as the salvage cards. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and say that we have completed enough of this encounter where we've received the encounter points that we needed, and we have agreed to move on to the campfire phase. As we've eliminated all the enemies, each one of our hunters will get to draw one salvage card, starting with our hunter that has the leader token. So my player over here will get a salvage card, and then my other player will receive one. All right. So at this point, then I'm going to move on to the campfire phase. The final phase in this encounter is the campfire phase, and this phase is going to have 3 steps that are going to be done in orders. The one exception to this is if the players have failed the encounter, at which point they're going to skip all the way to step 3. They're also going to discard any glory tokens that they have back to the supply. So from here, let's go ahead and look at the very first step in this. This is the victory step. During this step, each of the players is going to total up the number of glory points that they have, and the player that has the most glory points is going to receive a number of sun tokens. This is going to be based on the number of players that are playing. I'm not going to cover all of these different conditions in this video, so definitely check out the page in the rulebook for this, as it breaks it down very easily based on the number of players that are playing. So in my game, I'm playing with 2 players, and so my player over here has 4 sun, and my other player has 3. So in this situation, with a 2-player game, the player that has the most glory points is going to receive a full sun. So I'll go ahead and add that over, and this is going to be worth victory points into the game. That player is also going to gain or retain the leader token, and then you can discard all of the glory tokens back to the supply. The other player is simply going to discard their glory and will not receive any sun and will have the fledgling token. From there, then we're ready to move on to step 2. Step 2 of the campfire phase is going to have you upgrading your hunters. Now, this is only going to happen if you completed an encounter that is higher than your current level. So as you can see here, this is a level 1 encounter, and our hunter is currently at level 0, so he will get to upgrade. In order to do this, you're going to select one of the 2 traits or abilities that your hunter has on the next level. So we're going down to level 1. So we're going to either choose the Fire Forge or the Ablative Armor and to gain. So with that, you are allowed to look through these and see what your different options are. So for my player, I'm going to go ahead and choose the Fire Forged and place my token over there. Now this is going to allow me to gain this trait, and it will be added underneath my profile card, and I will gain this new ability that I'll be able to use for the rest of the game. Now some of these will also add cards and whatnot to your action deck. It's also going to increase your action deck, so at the end of the merchant phase, if you have not purchased any cards or enough cards to equal that new amount, you're going to add stamina cards to your deck instead, and I'll go over that during that phase as well. The final step in the campfire phase is to visit the merchant where you can purchase new equipment. In order to do this, you're going to take the merchant deck of the current level that you're in, so level 1 for us. Now, if a hunter has the ability to visit a higher level merchant, you're going to handle them separately, but it works exactly the same way that I'm presenting it here. From there, then you're going to shuffle up this deck and reveal a number of cards until you've revealed 1 weapon card, 1 armor, 2 ammo, 2 modification, and 1 miscellaneous card. Any cards that don't meet that requirement are simply going to be discarded off to the side. So I have an ammo. There's my 2 ammo cards. I have a modification card and an armor card. There's my second modification card. So I just need a miscellaneous and a weapon. So there's my miscellaneous. I just need a weapon now. And the sling. All right, from there, any of these cards that are discarded, you can shuffle back into that deck, and then you're ready to start with the player that has the leader token. From there, then you'll go in a clockwise manner with each player getting to take their turn. During a player's turn, starting again with the leader, you can spend resources to buy different items, and each item will have a cost. Now you can spend 2 metal shards to equal 1 special resource, or you can spend a modification card that you already have as a metal shard. Other than that, you can also choose to pass during your turn. So if you don't see anything you like, you can choose to pass and it'll go to the next player. But if all players pass, they're going to end the merchant step. The other important thing is with the fledgling token player, that player gets to get their first item that they select for free. They don't have to pay any resources for that item. And when an item is purchased, let's go ahead and say that somebody purchased this weapon card, then you would reveal cards again until you find a new weapon to be placed out. If you go through the entire deck of cards and there aren't any weapons in there, then you'll shuffle the discard pile and continue doing that. If there aren't any there, then the merchant step ends if you cannot place out a new item to meet the requirements, as you're always going to need all of these out. Once you've completed the merchant step, the final thing is to add any new items into your deck or replace other cards. So first off, we were able to get a new trap slinger, so we're going to go ahead and replace our old one with our new one. And then I also did purchase a modification. So this is a weapon modification, so I could either add it to one of my 2 weapons. So I think I'm going to go ahead and add this damage coil to my hammer. So I'm simply going to slide it under there so that the text on that is revealed. And each weapon has a maximum number of modifications that can be placed on it, as well as armor. The final thing is the shock wire. So this one will be added to my action deck. And again, if my action deck is already at its maximum amount, then I can replace any card in this action deck with this card. It doesn't have to be a card that matches this one. Then after I have added the cards to my deck, if it's still under the amount that I need, then I'm going to add stamina cards to that deck to finish it off. As I only added 1 card, I'll have to add 1 stamina card to bring this deck to 20, and then I can shuffle it up to be ready for my next encounter phase. Now, once you've completed 4 encounters, the final encounter in the game is the Hunter's Call. This encounter works just like the other encounters with a couple of exceptions. First off, the leader will not draw cards, as the Hunter's Call is the only card that's going to come up. And the player that has a fledgling token will draw an encounter or events and choose one that they would like to have for this. That'll be in effect. From there, then you'll set up the encounter just like you would with any other game. The one important note with this one is that whatever enemy is your quarry, anytime a player defeats that enemy, they will earn a half a sun. In a 1 or 2 player game, that's simply going to be 1 enemy, but in a 3 or 4 player game, you'll have 2 of those enemies out there. In our example, you would have 2 sawtooths, so each one that you defeat would get you half a sun as a victory point. From there, once you have completed the encounter, if you're successful, you'll move into the victory phase as normal and total up your points. And then from there, the player that has the most victory points will be the winner of the game. Otherwise, if you fail this encounter, the game is over and the players have lost, unfortunately, and you'll have to start a new game. So I hope you found this video helpful. I did my best to try to cover as many of the rules as possible, but let me know in the comments down below if you have any additional questions or anything else that comes up. I am also considering making a playthrough video to show everything in action, so let me know if that's something you're interested in seeing as well. And I hope you found this video helpful. I am also looking at doing videos for some of the expansions, so let me know if there's ones that you would really like me to cover specifically or sooner rather than later. So until next time, I'll see you later.